Hello guys, welcome back to Audible Odyssey. So let's step into a world of immersive storytelling where gripping tales of mystery, horror and adventure come to life. Each narration is crafted to pull you into the heart of the story, creating an unforgettable audio experience. From spine-tingling horrors to timeless classics, Audible Odyssey Adventures is your gateway to thrilling journeys beyond imagination. Subscribe now, and let the stories take you to places you've never dreamed of. Audible Odyssey presents. It's colder here than anywhere else on Earth, yet somehow it's also where the world is starting to burn. I guess that makes sense in a sick kind of way. After all, change rarely comes when you expect it. I've always loved the cold, the quiet. I thought of Antarctica as a distant paradise untouched by centuries of civilization, but that was before the ice started to melt, before the old things hidden deep beneath the glaciers began to stir, before I knew what fear really was. I guess I should start. Paleontologist Santos the geologist, Lynn the climatologist, was a field technician with a mechanical genius, Raft, a paleontologist, Olivier, our station medic, and Elena the botanist, and, of course, Adam, my best friend and our logistical coordinator. We weren't stationed there for glory alone. We had a job to survey newly exposed ground and catalog whatever we could. Most of the team were veterans of polar missions, but this was my first long stint. I remember our arrival, how excited I was stepping off the transport plane, looking at a horizon of shimmering ice, a newly revealed brown rock. We were the first people to lay eyes on that land in millions of years. I wish we never found out. About 3 weeks in, it was late November. Summer in Antarctica. The sun never really set. Just hovered on the horizon, painting the snowscape in perpetual twilight. By then, the patch of land we were studying had grown from a small rocky outcrop to an entire valley of recently exposed earth. Sublimation and melt had revealed sediment layers that no human had ever touched. The day we made the discovery, I was out with Cohen and Raft. Our small tracked vehicle trundled along a muddy slope. Mud in Antarctica. I know everything was wrong about that image. Raft was beside himself with excitement. Cohen kept shaking his head, muttering that we'd have better luck further down, where some icy rivulets were cut in through the sediment. We found an exposed cavity in the ground, a cave mouth framed by half-melted ice and dripping water. The ice had formed a natural vault, sealing something inside it. For who knows how long as the climate shifted, that vault had cracked open. Water pulled at the entrance, creating a kind of natural doorway into darkness. We decided to take a look. Just a quick peek. Cohen took the lead, Raft and I followed, shining our headlamps into the gloom. Inside, the floor was an uneven slick with molten water. Strange mineral formations hung from the ceiling. It smelled stale but not foul, at least not at first. As we ventured deeper, maybe 30 m in, we found a section where the ice had formed a crystalline wall beneath that thin layer of frost. I saw something dark and organic. It felt odd for reasons I still can't explain. It felt unnatural. A Raft crouched, scraping gently at the ice. Cohen hissed at him to be careful, but the damage was done. Our warm breath, our headlamps and body heat in that sealed chamber began to melt the delicate frost coating. What emerged behind the thinning ice was a mass of tangled shapes. At first, I thought they were roots or perhaps petrified plants, but as more of the frost sloughed away, I knew it was something else: bones, long twisted bones that didn't match any creature. I knew. Cohen's breath stopped. He whispered something about not fitting known classifications. He snapped pictures with trembling hands. Raft did the same. I just stood there, transfixed by the half-buried skeleton. It looked contorted, as if its limbs had too many joints. The skull, if that's what it was, seemed bulbous with ridges where the eyes might have been. We should have left right then. We should have packed up and never looked back. Instead, we collected a few ice core samples near that strange fossil and returned to base, our minds racing with curiosity and excitement. That night, back at McKinley Outpost, I examined a meltwater sample under a microscope. I was hoping to find some trace of ancient microbes. At first glance, the sample looked disappointingly mundane, but as I adjusted the focus and added a fluorescent dye, I noticed something moving, a faint erratic flicker of tiny viral particles, perhaps hidden among the melting permafrost microbes. I isolated them curious. They were odd, larger than normal, viruses with strange segmented areas. I labeled the sample TB19. I didn't know what it would do. The next few days were a whirlwind. Word had spread among us about the fossil. Cohen and Raft argued quietly about classification. Santos tried to match the surrounding geology, muttering about sediment layers that indicated a time frame millions of years old predating known Antarctic ecosystems. Lynn was worried about pathogens, but Olivier, our medic, insisted we'd be fine if we took standard precautions. He was methodical, but maybe have been too confident. Elena mostly kept to herself, pressing plants brought in from the Thor ground between sheets of plastic, and Adam, bless him, tried to keep everyone's spirits up, making coffee and jokes, telling me that we'd become famous for this discovery. I kept studying the virus for over 2 days. Its activity increased. When I warmed the sample to the human body temperature, I noticed how it latched onto common bacteria, hijacking their cells. It was aggressive. I remember telling Olivier that we should be careful, and he just nodded, agreeing to establish stricter quarantine measures for all of our music samples. We had suits and masks. We just got complacent. A few days later, one of our story nits malfunctioned. Thrower fluctuate demeaned us the backup generator was causing the fridge, might have allowed the virus to fish error. I rushed to the frosh of drop in trusted headsets, hardtops of the 9. Muggings. A things. Feedings. Point 1 back to the cave to take more samples. Cohen was analyzing the photos of the skeleton, trying to identify what it could be. Adam and Santos were out checking a nearby melt pool for microorganisms, but the next morning I woke with a headache and a weird taste in my nose and throat sore. I figured the feltitis dryer, maybe I had taken something cold and went about my day. Olivier noticed I was pale but didn't comment. He was busy with Cohen, who'd cut his hand opening a crate. Just a small cut. Nothing serious. That afternoon, Elena and Raft returned from the cave. They were soaked, tired, and strangely quiet. Elena particularly seemed disturbed when I inquired. She shook her head. "We found more remains," she said softly. "Not just one skeleton, many, all twisted and fused, not like animals, but something else." Her voice cracked. Raft just stared at the floor. He wouldn't talk to me at all. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came that night. We were all in the hall trying to maintain a semblance of normal routine. A pot of rehydrated stew, stale crackers, weak coffee. I sat at the table, eyes drifting over my colleagues' faces. Cohen was drunk and still rubbing his bandaged and Lynn tapped her fingers nervously on st tabletop. Top. Adam gave me glance. Lance. Excellence. Then Elena suddenly root up, knocking straight forward. It clattered loud enough to make us all jump. Her face was flushed, her breathing heavy. She clutched her chest, tears forming in her eyes. "I felt hot," she gasped, "something's wrong." Before Olivier could reach her, she collapsed onto the floor convulsing, her eyes rolled back and foam flecked her lips. I rushed over with Olivier, my heart pounding. We tried to hold her still. She felt scorching to the touch, as if a fever had raged to life inside her. In mere seconds. Olivier yelled for medic. Adam darted to fetch it while the rest of us formed watching our colleagues spasm. Then, suddenly, understated, the fit stopped. Elena lay there breathing shallowly. Olivier and I hoisted her up and carried her to the infirmary. Lynn followed while the others stayed back stunned. We spent the next hour trying to stabilize her. She screamed in delirium, her eyes unfocused. I tried to talk to her to calm her down. She only whispered nonsense. "They're hungry, they're so hungry." I heard them in the dark. After a massive dose of antiproton and sedatives, she finally slipped into a restless sleep. Olivier stepped back, breathing heavily. His forehead was creased with some kind of infection. He said her temperature's off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. I thought about the virus, about my samples, about our LAX protocols. I said nothing, but guilt jeered at me. I needed to check for viral markers, but first I had to see if anyone else was showing symptoms. By the next morning, Elena's condition was worse and strange lesions formed on her back and neck, blackish and raised. She scratched at them, drawing blood. Olivier tried antiviral meds that we had on hand, experimental stuff. No improvement. If anything, it seemed to agitate her. She hissed and moaned in her half-conscious state, muttering again about hunger, about things moving beneath the ice. I worked feverishly in the lab scanning blood samples under the microscope. What I saw made my blood run colder than any Antarctic wind. The virus I'd isolated, TB19, was everywhere in her bloodstream. It was replicating at a staggering rate, mutating cells, stripping away normal human structures. It attacked her DNA like a parasite, rewriting a host's identity. I ran more tests and realized something horrific. The virus didn't just kill cells, it transformed them. Her cells were changing shape, sprouting strange roots. Muscle cells broke down and then reformed into something else. Fibers with odd crystallizations in sight. The virus was making her different. I reported my findings to the group. Olivier's eyes were haunted. Adam placed a trembling hand on my shoulder. Cohen tried to deny this. "Impossible," he yelled, but we could all see Elena's body rejecting humans normally. She looked thinner, but her muscles twitched with natural strength. She snapped at Olivier when he tried to take another sample, biting at the air like an animal. Raft and Santos were missing from breakfast. They'd left early to recheck the fossil site without telling anyone they'd taken the second vehicle. That worries me. If they were infected too. Who knew how the virus spread through air contact or something else? We tried to radio them, but there was no answer. The storm outside had worsened with high winds, and blowing snow battered the outpost. The weather window we'd enjoyed was closing fast, trapping us in our newfound nightmare. By midday, Elena had slipped into a kind of coma, her eyes half open but unseen, being her limbs rigid. Olivier insisted on restraining her to the bed for her own safety. Quietly asked if we should take other measures. No one wanted to think about murdering a colleague. It was unthinkable, but I caught Adam's eye. We shared a look. We both knew how bad this was. That evening, Santos and Raft returned, or rather something returned, wearing their coats. They stumbled through the door, pale and shaking. We rushed to greet them. Relief turned to horror as we saw their faces. Both men had lesions similar to Elena's. Their eyes were bloodshot, pupils dilated and oddly shaped, as if something tugged at their very biology. They slurred their words, babbling nonsense about a sinkhole near the cave and shapes moving beneath the ground. They mentioned singing low humming from the earth. Then they both collapsed. We dragged them to the infirmary, placing them in beds opposite to Elena. Now we have 3 infected, all in various stages of transformation. Olivier did all he could, for fluids, antiviral attempts, sedation. Nothing worked. The virus marched on in them, remaking their flesh. The rest of us, Adam, Cohen, Lynn and Deb, huddled in the mess hall. The lights flickered as the wind screamed outside. We discussed options. Quarantine was obvious, lock down the infected in the infirmary, but what if they broke out? Dimob suggested barricading the door. Cohen shook his head, horrified at the thought of treating colleagues like dangerous animals. Lynn cried softly, saying this could get out to the world if we ever returned home. That was the worst realization. What if we couldn't control this? We were remote. Yes, but supply ships and planes would eventually come. If the virus spread beyond us, what dark hell would we unleash on humanity? I felt dizzy and nauseated, my own throat was still sore. I coughed quietly into my sleeve, hoping no one else would notice. The following day, Elena changed. We awoke to screams from the infirmary. Cohen had gone to check on them early. We rushed after him inside. I saw Elena upright in her bed, free of her restraints. The straps had snapped, she hissed, baring teeth that looked sharper than before. Black lesions covered half of her face. Cohen stood frozen and she lunged at him. He screamed as she knocked him into the supply cabinets, glass shattering. Olivia yelled and tried to pull her off, only to be met with human strength. I watched, paralyzed by terror, as she bent Cohen's arm backwards with a sickening crack of his cries curdled my blood. Dimob and Adam rushed forward. Adam grabbed a fire extinguisher and slammed it into Elena's shoulder. She screeched, stumbling back, her eyes fixated on Adam, and for a moment I swore she recognized him. She shook her head as if confused and then snarled. Olivier pulled Cohen clear, dragging him outside into the corridor. I picked up a chair ready to defend myself. Lynn stood behind me sobbing. Elena was slowly limping now, her body twisting and stretching in ways I hadn't seen before. Behind her, I saw Raft and Santos stirring on their beds, their bodies jerking as the virus roused them from sleep. We couldn't let them all turn. We'd be overrun. Get out! I screamed to the others, inching towards the door. Adam nodded, pushing Lynn ahead. Dimob held the fire extinguisher like a club. We backed out, and as we did, Raft rolled off of his bed, landing on all fours like a beast. He was changing too. The bones in his neck jotted out a grinding sound accompanying the unnatural posture. Once we were in the corridor, Dimob slammed the infirmary door shut. Adam and I shoved a heavy equipment cart against it. Inside, we heard furious banging and scraping. They were trapped for now. We were left with Cohen's moans echoing in the sterile hallway. Olivier tore open his shirt, checking his broken arm. Cohen's face was bloodless, shock setting in. We needed splints and painkillers, Olivier said, his voice shook. She broke his arm like a twig. I knelt beside them shaking. Cohen would need medical attention, but we had to be careful about any contact with infected blood. Droplets could spread to Olivier. I asked softly, "Do you think he is infected?" Now she scratched him. There was blood. Olivier looked at me with full eyes. I don't know. He applied disinfectant and bandages, working quickly. As Cohen passed out from the pain, we carried him to the lounge, clearing a couch. Lynn hovered anxiously. Dimob paced the corridor holding the extinguisher like it was a shotgun. Adam sat against the wall, head in his hands. I coughed again, a deep chesty cough. I felt hot sweat trickling down my spine. Unbridled fear wrapped itself around my heart. No, not me, not now. We decided that we had to leave. It sounded ridiculous. The area's weather was worsening and our track vehicles might not survive a long journey to the nearest station. But staying meant certain death and worse, release of this horror into the world. We had to isolate ourselves or find help. Dimob argued we should try and radio McLeod Station. Adam reminded him that McLeod was too far. No one would get there on time. Lynn wanted to destroy the infected. right now, set fire to the infirmary, but we had no reliable flamethrowers or weapons. Olivier refused to even consider killing them. They were our colleagues. My head pounded. I drifted away from the conversation, nausea and fever swirling inside me. The virus was inside me. I knew it. I tested my own blood in secret that morning, just a quick smear under the microscope. I saw the viral particles writhing in my cells. I was a ticking time bomb. I didn't tell the others. Maybe I should have, but I was scared of what they might do to. I was scared that I'd become a monster that would tear them apart. That night, the infirmary door rattled. We could hear the infected clawing at it. The wood splintered, the equipment cart shifted. They were getting stronger. Cohen woke up briefly. Delirious with fever, Olivier and I exchanged glances as another one infected. Soon he'd be joining them. We hatched a desperate plan. We'd load one of the tracked vehicles with supplies and drive out as far as we could. It might mean death by exposure, but at least we would die as humans. Maybe we could circle back to, find another outpost, or maybe just drive into the white nothingness until we froze, taking the virus with us, but first we had to deal with our infected colleagues. Letting them roam free was unthinkable. If they escaped the building after we left, they might migrate, survive somehow, or stay dormant until rescue crews arrived. Then the virus would spread beyond Antarctica, beyond control. I remember looking at Adam and seeing the pain in his eyes. He wanted no part in killing anyone. He was gentle by nature, but we both knew what had to be done. We divided tasks. Lynn and Demob would gather fuel and rig something to burn the infirmary. Olivier and Adam would prep the vehicle and pack rations. I said I'd help Lynn, but first I sneaked into the lab. I needed to check for any last-ditch cure. My fever was getting worse. My hands shook as I petted chemicals. The virus was resistant to anything we threw at it. It didn't respond to heat shocks or antivirals. It just adapted, evolving rapidly. It was impossible. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel. My eyes were bloodshot. Black specks dotted the skin at my collarbone. It will happen to me soon. My limbs would twist, my mind would slip away. I couldn't let that happen outside these walls. I grabbed a syringe and filled it with a sedative enough to knock me out permanently if I wanted an escape hatch. If I lost control, the screaming started, then I rushed out to the corridor. The infirmary door had burst open and Santos was free crawling out. Their bodies were partially human, partially something else. Twisted spines hunched beneath torn clothing, their eyes glowing with a maddened hunger. Elena emerged behind them, her jaw unhinged, drool mixed with blood dripping down her chin. Demob yelled and swung the fire extinguisher, connecting with Santos's head. The creature shrieked but barely flinched. It grabbed Ember's arm and yanked, sending him sprawling. Lynn hit a canister of ethanol at the raft, which shattered and doused him. She flicked on a lighter, where she found it I'll never know, and tossed it forward. Flames erupted, causing Raffia to screech. The stench of burning flesh filled the corridor. Elena lunged at me. I stepped back, absolutely terrified. She reached out with lengthened fingers, nails like claws. I raised the syringe, my only weapon. As she came close, I jabbed it into her neck and pressed the plunger. She roared, swatting me aside. The syringe might have had no effect. But maybe it would have slowed her down. Adam rushed in, wielding a metal pole. He struck Elena from behind, distracting her. Olivier tried to pull Demob free from Santos's grip. I saw Lynn trying desperately to keep the flames confined, but now the corridor was thick with smoke. The alarm shrieked. I coughed, choking on smoke, my fever raging. I retreated into a side room. My head was spinning. I heard Demob scream, I heard Adam shout my name. Guilt and terror wrestled in my chest. Moments later, Adam dragged me out, coughing. "We have to go," he said, voice cracking, "they've killed Demob." Lynn appeared behind him, tears streaking her smudged face. Olivier was nowhere in sight. We stumbled to the storage bay with a tracked vehicle waiting. Cohen was there slumped against the crate, breathing raggedly. He looked up at us, his eyes sunken. "I'm infected," he said softly, "I can feel it." He picked up a flare gun and pointed it towards him. Hands shaking, he whispered, "Go now." I ran half limping, one arm over Adam's shoulders. Lynn followed. The screams and animal shrieks echoed from behind. As we boarded the vehicle, I heard a muffled pop of Cohen's flare gun. I hoped he found a quick end. Adam revved the engine. The storm had eased slightly, but visibility was poor. The heavy treads rolled over slush and ice heading into the unknown. We left behind McKinley Outpost. Now burning flames flickered in the rear-view mirror as we crawled away inside the cab in silence, rain except for the rumble of the engine. Adam looked straight ahead, his eyes moist with tears. I coughed again. I felt the virus goring at my insides, my skin itched. I thought about telling them. I almost did, but what good would it do? They'd be forced to kill me or leave me behind, and we were in the middle of nowhere. If I jumped out, the virus would freeze with me locked in my. That might have been the best solution, but I was a coward. I wanted a few more minutes of life. It's funny how much you subconsciously cling to life when you know it's going to soon be wrenched away. We traveled until our fuel gauge dipped low. We reached a stretch of barren rock, a place that the ice had only recently abandoned. Sobs had quieted. Adam's face was ghostly white. He noticed me shivering and asked me if I was okay. I lied, said it was just nerves. We stopped the vehicle near a ridge. The wind blasted across exposed stone. Adam proposed we set up a small camp and try the radio, attempt contact one last time. If we got no answer, we'd find a crevasse and bury ourselves in the virus forever. I could see the anguish in his eyes. Lynn went outside to set up the radio antenna. Adam stayed with me in the cab. I sat in the passenger seat, every muscle aching. Black lesions marred my neck. He hadn't noticed, or maybe he was in denial. I reached into my pocket and felt the empty syringe casing. I had no sedatives left. My vision blurred. I tried to focus on Adam's voice, as he spoke softly about better days, about how we once thought Antarctica was a frontier of knowledge, not horror. He apologized for not protecting me as if it was his fault. I felt a hunger building inside of me. My nails scraped the seat. I bit my lip until it bled, trying to keep control. I realized that this was it. I had maybe minutes before I'd lose my mind. I reached for the door handle. "Mark?" Adam asked. I opened the door, stepping out into the bitter cold. The wind whipped at my face. I stumbled into the open knees. I heard Adam calling my name behind me, but I walked faster. I didn't want him to see what I'd become. Lynn was setting up the antenna about 20 m away. She looked up, startled as I approached. I saw suspicion in her eyes. She noticed my posture. I tried to smile reassuringly but probably failed. She reached for a wrench on the ground, holding it like a weapon. I stopped a few paces from her. I could feel the virus rushing through my veins, screaming at me to feed, to spread. My fingers twitched. I managed to speak. "Voice, rough." "Lynn, back away. I'm infected." Her face went as pale as ice. She shouted for Adam. I shook my head, tears freezing on my cheeks, coming closer. I rasped, "I'll kill you if you do the virus. I can't control it." My throat burned with the wind. I made a decision, the only one I had left. I turned and ran, stumbling down a slope of loose gravel and ice. I heard Adam yell, felt his footsteps behind me, but I pushed on. My limbs ached, bones grinding as they began to reshape. I wouldn't let the monster take them. I reached a thin patch of ice, in a crass perfect. The ice sheet was fragile, already melting at the edges without hesitation. I jumped onto it. The sheets cracked, spiderweb fractures shooting across their surface. I stepped again harder, this time even as pain rippled through my body. I glanced back and saw Adam at the ridge, horror on his face. I forced a smile, or tried to. He reached out, screaming my name. I raised a trembling hand in goodbye, then I stomped my foot down as the ice gave way. I plummeted into darkness, cold air rushing past me, the crass walls blurred. The virus screamed in my veins, but I knew soon the cold and the impact would end me as I fell. I imagined the old Antarctica frozen and pristine long before human hands touched it, before monsters and viruses and ancient bones. I imagined my colleagues laughing overexcited about discovering something new. I hoped Adam and Lynn would survive and find a way to warn the world they were better people than me, braver they might find peace. The darkness closed in, the wind roared, and somewhere I swore I heard that ancient hunger crying out, furious at being denied its prey, but it would die with me down here, frozen beneath the ice that once concealed it. I hope the world never knows what truly happened. If you find this record these words I've somehow managed to record in my last moments, then please heed them. This virus, this thing we unearthed, must never escape the polar deserts. It belongs in the Earth's ancient tomb, let it remain a secret forgotten beneath the endless cold. But if you're the poor soul who's found this, run, it might be too late. But for the love of all that's alive, run. For more terrifying creepypasta horror stories, check out the playlist or the video on screen. So guys, the video has ended now. If you like our stories and want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to Audible Odyssey channel and do all these things, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Enjoy horror and adventure stories like this. So just subscribe to Audible Odyssey. Bye bye.